Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, you'll be hearing from three of us undergrads speaking about our pathways to undergraduate research. You're going to be hearing about a couple, sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. You'll be hearing about a couple different experiences. We all have very different pathways. So hopefully this is very beneficial for all of you, and I hope you enjoy. So with that, I'll get started. So my name is Anusha Gopinath. I'm a senior physiology and neurobiology major, and I'm on the pre-med track. I am currently doing research at UConn Health through the Health Research Program in the neuroscience department in the Oliver Lab. So essentially, the topic that I'm studying, the big picture that we're studying is tinnitus, and we're trying to figure out if there's a way to diagnose people with tinnitus. My question specifically is which stimuli produces the biggest difference in subjects with and without tinnitus? So essentially, to give our research in a nutshell, we have a electrophysiological test that we do with these human subjects, and we present them with different stimuli. And the goal is that we'll find some difference between normal subjects with normal hearing and no tinnitus compared to subjects who have either hearing loss or tinnitus. So just trying to find some difference is the biggest thing that we're trying to look for.
Hi everyone, my name is Julie, and I'm a dual degree in molecular and cellular biology and nutritional sciences. I'm also a senior, and I've had 2 years of research experience in the Choi lab in the nutritional sciences department. He's a newer professor. And I don't really have like a research question, but I created a colon cancer intestinal cell line that we knocked out ZIP4, which is a zinc transporter gene that we all have in our intestines. And we did this using CRISPR, which is like pretty cool gene editing technique. And we use these with colon cancer cells.
And our third panelist, unfortunately, could not be here with us in person today. However, we do have videos from her, so you will get to hear a little bit about her experience. But this is Alison. She is also a senior physiology and neurobiology major, and she is currently working in the OSTRAF lab in the P&B department at UConn Stores. And her research question is, how does the expression of calcium binding proteins, which are involved in memory, change in the lateral amygdala when rats are fear or safety trained? And are there differences between sexes? So with that, we'll get started with the questions. So our first question is how we got started in research. So I guess I'll get started with that one. Research for me was something that I've always been interested in joining. Even before I was in college, it's something that I've heard about and I thought was something that was cool, especially being a STEM major. It's something that's pretty common. So I have been searching, or I had been searching for research experiences, starting as early as spring semester of freshman year to sophomore year. Nothing really stuck. And ultimately it was last fall, 2 years ago now, in the fall of 2020, that I decided to apply for the health research program. I looked at the entire list of labs that were conducting research, and I picked a couple that were interesting to me, and I ended up getting a placement in Dr. Oliver's lab, and I have really enjoyed it so far. So that's my start to research.
Okay, so I have a little bit different of a start to research, well, kind of similar. I also started looking like the second semester of freshman year, and into sophomore year, I was a part of 2 different labs, but none of them, I wasn't just super interested in it. Like it wasn't what I wanted to do research in. So over the summer between my sophomore and junior year, like beginning of COVID, basically, I just started looking into nutritional sciences research because I was originally a minor in nutritional sciences. So I thought to get more experience in that field, I would join research. And I reached out to actually the department head, Dr. Lee, and she then directed me to this new professor, Dr. Choi, who was just starting and had no one. So I was able to join his lab, and it's been great because it's been nice to see like how a lab has started. because normally you just go into a lab and everything's like already done and everything's placed and like, you know, the chemicals are already labeled in specific ways, but it was nice to be able to like learn why you label the chemicals a certain way or like where you put all these different types of stuff. So yeah, a simple email. That's how I got started.
And then here's Allie.
Okay, so the first question is how did you get started in research? And the way that this worked out is very typical, I think, for a lot of people who start out in research really young, which is what I did. I started out in high school, and it was actually through my mom. So my mom is a research scientist, and she was mentoring another woman in science. And so I had reached out to the person that she was mentoring, and I was really interested in the work that she was doing because my passion is studying diseases of aging, so Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, etc. And that's what she was studying in her lab up at Mass General Hospital. And so I'd reached out to her, and at that time my mom was also working in Boston, and so I was like, you know, this is a great opportunity to like just network. So we went out to dinner, and I talked to her about things I was interested in, and then she was like, you know what, how about you come tour the lab, and we'll see if we can fit you in somewhere, and you could just learn some basic skills, some basic science. And that's really how I got my start. And I think something I want to mention is like connections are important, and don't feel weird when you're first starting out about trying to, you know, talk to people on LinkedIn or connect with people. A lot of more senior scientists are looking for those mentorship roles because they want to give back to the community. So definitely don't feel weird about it. I know I did at first, and it's a good way to get yourself in there and in the front door. So that's how I first got started.
So as you can probably tell, we each have very different experiences of getting into research, where Allie has more of a background with her family, so she kind of started at a young age. Julie has more of a traditional approach where she reached out to a professor, and I've gone through a program. So those are kind of the three main ways that you can go about it, but obviously there's endless possibilities. Lisa, would you mind starting the next question?
Okay.
Sure. So question number 2 is, what resources did you utilize to get into research? Julie, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. I would say like the different departments' websites, like seeing the professors, like what their research was and reading like the little snippets they have and reading like their articles that they've already been like cited in or what they've like published themselves. And email was a big resource. Obviously, that's like how I got like my position. So kind of basic, but I think they're two important things.
I would definitely agree that looking up a certain professor's research is really important, and it can kind of let you figure out what you'd be interested in, because yes, research is sometimes something that you just need to get the experience, but I'd say for most people, you want to be passionate about it. And it might not be the exact thing that you're passionate about, but researching what a professor's already done and published is a great way to kind of realize which direction you want to go in. I know for me, I had a friend who was in a psych lab, and I kind of considered that for a little bit. And I finally realized that's not really what I wanted. I wanted more of a bench lab, but I think Julie could also talk to this. We have very different experiences where I primarily work with mice and humans. I don't really have a wet lab, whereas Julie, that's a lot more what she has, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, wet lab's obviously very different. I sit and look at cells basically most of the time. So it's definitely kind of harder to like imagine what you're doing is going to have some significance. But it's definitely both are impactful.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, that's kind of one thing I have realized, that I'm glad that I work with mice because it is a little more tangible. But these are all things that you just kind of, the steps you take to kind of figure out what you like. And obviously you can change along the way as well.
Okay, so the next question for all of you is, what are some research myths that you'd like to debunk? So Anusha, we'll go back to you with this one.
So one of the biggest research myths I think that I'd like to debunk is that you need to know everything going in. I know for me personally, because I hadn't started research until after my junior year, I felt a lot of anxiety over starting this program because I felt that I wouldn't have the skills and that it was just basically a lot of imposter syndrome where I was like, they hired the wrong person and all that stuff. But I think with that, you have to realize that they expect you to be relatively intelligent, obviously, but they're not expecting you to know these high, like intense science topics or how to complete a Western blot or none of that stuff. They're just expecting, in my opinion, that you're willing to learn and that you're going to dedicate time towards learning whatever it is that you need to do the research. So that's one of the biggest myths, I think, especially, like I said, prior to college, when I'd heard about research, I thought, how is an undergrad supposed to know exactly how to research a topic? It just sounds like such a scary idea. So just taking a step back to be like, you're just starting out. You're not expected to have all the answers.
I would say like a big myth is that like the professors don't want to help you and like you're basically just going to learn from graduate students. And I think in some cases that might happen, but I think it's very lab to lab basis. But at least for me, like my specific professor has been so hands-on with me, which has been really nice because I always just kind of expected that the graduate students would be teaching me. And when I started, there weren't even any graduate students, like it was literally just me. Obviously that's like a very niche case, but it was definitely nice to have him like always with me and like him teaching me different techniques and stuff instead of learning them from graduate students. And you never know, you might be able to teach a graduate student something someday because we got a new one last semester and I had to teach him everything. So don't underestimate yourself.
So, one of the research myths that I want to debunk is this idea that you need to know everything on your first day, and that if you ask questions, they'll be considered dumb questions, and so you should just not ask questions and figure everything out yourself. And because I started so young, I really was nervous that if I asked, I don't understand what this reagent does, or I don't understand the structure of a neuron and why it looks this way and how I can pick it out when I'm taking pictures of different brain slices. You shouldn't be afraid to ever ask questions, and no one expects you to know everything. It'd be crazy if they did. So definitely don't feel weird about doing and asking questions. But I would say that if you want to help yourself feel a little bit better walking in, like do a literature review, get yourself ready for what you think you might be walking into. And if you're putting in the effort, they'll see that and they'll help you with whatever you need. But don't feel like you need to walk in knowing everything, because no one does.
I think that's great advice about not needing to know everything. I'm glad that two of you touched on that topic. So next question, what are some pros and cons of either research in general or your specific research experience?
Julie, do you want to take it away or should I get started?
I can go. I would say the biggest pro for me is seeing what I learned in class, like actually happen in real life. Because like I took like a genetics class and we learned about CRISPR, and it was so cool to be able to actually use it. And it was like created by a woman. So like it was really cool to like see something that a woman like created like only a couple of years ago too. So that was like definitely really fascinating to see. I would say a con is that it does take up a decent amount of time if you like really want to like put your full force into it and like do a project and do a thesis or whatever. Because obviously you have to like conduct all the research and then write the thesis all yourself. A lot of times last semester I was there for like 10 to 20 hours a week. But I think if you really have that time and you really want to like do research, then it's definitely worth it.
I would agree with all of that. I would add for me, one of the pros is that the time in which I've joined this lab, because we are very much wrapping up our lab. Julie and I have very different experiences where, like she said previously, she's at the start. Her PI is very much new, whereas Dr. Oliver has basically founded the neuroscience department at UConn Health. So very much bookends, and then Allie's right in the middle, which is funny enough. But I'd say because of that, it's definitely, it's getting to a point where it's going from bench table to bedside. And when I started over the summer was when they first started human subjects, which since I'm pre-med, I obviously am interested in working with patients one day. So that was really cool for me. And to see that they're actual humans that we're helping, I think it's oftentimes lost in translation when you're doing research, when you're looking at a bunch of numbers or a bunch of cells or whatever it may be, that's actually helping someone one day. So I think that's one of the biggest pros. And I think there's nothing that I've really done thus far that's been this large scale where it has the potential to help so many people. So that's one of the biggest pros to me. For the cons, I'd agree, timing. If you have a good understanding, it could work out. Unfortunately, it doesn't all the time. Undergrads sometimes do have to work a little longer, but that's also what you're willing to give in. But I would say for me, on the flip side of how cool it is that we can be helping so many people, when we don't figure something out, sometimes it's a lot more discouraging because you think that you're so close to figuring it out, and then it's like, it didn't work. So that's sometimes a little disappointing. I wouldn't say it's a con per se, but you do have to get used to the idea of constantly pivoting. I'd say I would start some data analysis and then the next week they'd be like, scratch that, start this. And then it would just be a cycle and on and on. And I think now it's finally at a point where we've kind of done everything we can. So it's now like figuring out what we have, or figuring out everything with what we have. But towards the beginning, it definitely was a little frustrating being like, I just spent a week working on this thing and now it doesn't matter anymore. So that's kind of a con that comes with research. I think Allie replied to this as well. Oh, no.
All right, so we can jump into the next question, which is, how have your experiences varied? Anusha, I think it's your turn to go first.
Yeah. This is definitely, they've been so different, but at the end of the day, there are obviously a lot of similarities. I'd say for me, being in a program honestly was the perfect position for me to be in, because I think had I gone straight into emailing a professor like Julie did, I might not have enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed it being in a program, because it was a lot more structured and there wasn't as much wiggle room, which might sound like not the best thing if that's what you're interested in, but I liked how structured they kept me at the beginning, and then I slowly gained more freedom and I was able to kind of, work on my own and all that stuff, obviously. But I think for me, being in a program, it was very much like, we're teaching you, and then we moved on. And as the semester started, I definitely, like last in the fall, I definitely was pretty much completely independent, but starting off, it was definitely a very different experience, because I think it was more slow paced, because it was like, I was there every single day from like 10 to 5 or whatever it was. So instead of, going in once or twice a week for a couple hours, it was like I was working full days. So it was a very different experience with that, because it was more of a job as opposed to a side thing. And then moving into the semester, it became easy to kind of balance the two. It wasn't difficult to do research as well as academics.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is definitely kind of opposite of Anusha's, whereas I started throughout the semester. So I only worked a couple hours a week in the lab. And then over the summer, I had like a full-time, like a part-time position with them. So I was working every single day, which it was definitely different than over the semester. And I would say I definitely had a lot of freedom. And what my PI really wanted is for me to like take on my full thesis by myself, especially since I'm doing like an honors thesis for the honors program. So I definitely say I kind of got thrown in to kind of, and I had like all this freedom, which was good and bad because I definitely have made a lot of mistakes that now I like know and I have marked down in my lab notebook, like not to make these mistakes again. So that was obviously nice because he was very much like, you need to learn yourself and like learn how to make your own mistakes and learn how to fix those mistakes, which was really nice because I feel like I never really had that type of experience before.
I'd say additionally, I mentioned this earlier, but how Julie's professor is just starting out and mine is nearing the end of his career. That definitely also plays a role in how I think both of us have been taught, where because my PI has been doing this for so many years, he's had, I think, 4 or 5 like student interns in the past 4 or 5 years. He knows exactly what we're capable of and what, like how he can push our boundaries out of our comfort zone, but still, you know, while being understanding that we're undergrads and students. Whereas I think Julie's probably been pushed a little further out of her comfort zone. Obviously you can speak to this, Julie, but from my perspective than I have, because since he's newer, he is more comfortable pushing you a little further. Whereas I think with Dr. Oliver, he's understands my boundaries a little better since he's had so many students in the past.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I feel like there would be days that I would like show up during the summer and like no one would be there. And it was just like I had to know what to do and I couldn't mess it up. And like, you know, obviously it's a summer, so like not many people are in the building. So it's like if you mess something up, you got to deal with it on your own. So, but honestly, a big like growing time, especially from like the difference between May and like August. Like by the end of the summer, like I decided what I kind of wanted to do with like my future based off of like what I did that summer.
So I have participated in 3 different, or I've been a member of 3 different labs. I was a member of a laboratory at Mass General Hospital. I was also in a lab at Yale, and I've been at a lab at UConn, just my undergraduate career. And I think the projects have stayed pretty much, I mean, they're very different, don't get me wrong, but the theme has been very consistent, but mostly learning in memory. And the techniques have been very similar. So things that you learn in one lab, you can easily translate to another research experience, but the main way things have varied is in the people that I've been able to connect with. And I think that's the biggest thing that I want to stress, is that when you are looking at a lab, you want to be able to meet the people you'll be working with, because if you're doing a summer internship or if you're taking on a lab undergraduate here at UConn, you're going to be spending a good amount of time with those people. So it's never a bad idea to go in there, ask to get a lab tour, to walk around, to interact with those you might be working with, and see if you can see yourself there. Because if you can see yourself there, you'll do your best work there, and you'll be motivated to do your best work. So the real way lab experiences differ from one another is the people. So choose somewhere that you'll be happy to go in every day.
Kind of going off of a point that Ali just mentioned, I went, like I said, I had a couple health research program labs that I had applied to. And in the end, I had 3 interviews. So it was a week of 3 different labs that I was interviewing for. And the first one was, well, it doesn't matter what the actual lab was, but the interview was about 30 minutes. The one in the lab that I am currently in was an hour. And the first half an hour was me just learning about the lab and kind of getting an overview of what they do and all that stuff. And then the second half hour, everyone joined in on the call and everyone asked me questions. So it was 5 or 6 people were asking me questions. And then the third interview was 15 minutes. So I remember so vividly after that second interview feeling so stressed because they had really kind of bombarded me with a lot of questions and feeling like, oh my God, I didn't know what I was talking about. Like I said, the whole imposter syndrome. And ultimately, that's the lab I got. And in hindsight, I'm so glad that that it worked out this way, because I mean, I guess I will never know how it would have worked out, but I'm so glad that I got to see the people. And like Ali said, I knew that I liked all of them and that I wasn't worried about that aspect. So then it came down to the actual research and all that stuff. And that's definitely a huge part of a lab. Like everyone in my lab is really great to work with, and we have happy hours and all that stuff. So it's the community that we have is definitely a big part of it and makes me enjoy it so much more. So I know that wasn't really the original question in terms of how it's varied, but that's definitely a really important point as well.
Okay. So this is one of my favorite questions. How will having conducted research as part of your undergraduate career specifically help in your future goals? So I think it's Julie's turn. Yeah.
So I would say it's definitely helped me figure out that I don't want to do this in my future, and I don't want to work specifically in wet lab. I do have a little experience at Connecticut Children's with some clinical research, but it's not really like my big experience. And honestly, from the little work I've done there, I've enjoyed that a little more than working with cells all day. I think it's been definitely enjoyable to like learn the very like microscopic things of research, but I really just don't want to do that in my future. So that kind of led me to apply into like master programs for nutrition, but focusing on like public health and human nutrition instead of like nutrient genomics and nutrient genetics. So that definitely helped. And I think my research experience, I did get into a program. So I'm excited to say that I will be getting a master's. So I definitely think my research experience helped with that too, because they saw that like I was committed and I did all these cool things. So yeah.
I would say for me, I would agree to a certain extent how, as much as I've enjoyed my experience, this has shown me that I don't want to commit myself fully to research in the future. More for the fact that I think I've realized that as a person, I want to be able to like treat a person and see that I've helped them kind of instantaneously, maybe not that quick, but I think as a person, I want the one-on-one relationship with patients, and I want to see how their life is improved by what I can help them with. Research is really, really cool because you can help millions of people potentially, but it takes years and years to get to the point where you can maybe help a subset of people. And I think I wouldn't enjoy that as much. I think I would eventually get frustrated. And seeing the postdocs in my lab, how they have dedicated their life to this, it's amazing, honestly, because I don't think I could do that, but it's cool because that's what they're so driven to do. And they want to look at the numbers and figure everything out. And they want to have that widespread help that they can offer. Whereas I think maybe it's a bit more selfish, honestly, that I want to feel like I've helped individual people and have that relationship and the interaction that comes along the way. I will say that it's changed it's broadened my horizons on what the field of medicine is, because I think I've always seen myself as only being a physician and just a clinical doctor, but I could potentially see assisting with research. We actually connect with one of the ENTs at UConn Health, and she basically helps us find the patients that are, or the subjects that we use and all that stuff. So I could potentially see myself being involved, but maybe not doing it as my primary thing that I do, if that makes sense.
So in terms of future goals, I think I want to generalize this question a little bit. So some skills that I think are invaluable in research that I couldn't have learned elsewhere are being able to communicate my science at different depths. And really what this means is that I could my research background is mostly in Alzheimer's disease, so I could go and talk to someone who also only studies Alzheimer's disease, and we could have a very in-depth conversation using scientific lingo, talking about specific experiments we've run, things of that nature, and they could understand. But I could also go to my grandma and tell her about my project in a way that she would understand. And I think that skill to communicate your science at different depths depending on the audience is an invaluable skill that research has helped me develop. So
All right. Do either of you want to respond to Alison's video there, or do you want to jump into the other questions?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely very true. I'd say there's a big difference between what you learn in class in terms of the language and how you're taught, very definition based. And yes, you do learn conceptually and you're expected to be able to analyze things, but actually learning about something from the root, I guess you could say, does change your perspective. And I know for me, I've talked to a lot of people about, obviously people ask like, what are you doing research in and all that stuff. So I have explained what tinnitus is, and it's funny because I'll have a lot of family members who'll be like, oh yeah, like I have ringing in my ears too. So it's definitely, I think tinnitus is kind of a different subject because a lot of people have either experienced it like either whether it's acute or chronic, but it definitely is a skill to be able to speak to a wide range of audiences. And I know even within our lab meetings, and sometimes we'll have a presentation of one of the postdocs or the grad students or one of us maybe, and we'll all critique. And I think that's important too, because it's not like as a PhD candidate or PhD person, they're like, oh, an undergrad's input isn't important. A lot of times it's almost beneficial because you can be like, for a person who has a baseline knowledge, this is how you should, or this is how you could say something, or whatever the case may be. So yes, language is definitely very important and a really good skill to have.
I think that's a great point. Thanks for following up with that, Anusha. So I'm going to read out some of the questions that we have in the chat. And Julie, the first question is for you. And it says, I'd love to hear more about what you included in your email to the professor or the department head that you initially reached out to.
I honestly don't remember specifically, but I will say it was like August before the semester started, like early August. It was at like 10 o'clock at night. And I was just basically like, hi, Dr. Lee, like, do you have any positions open in your lab? Like, I'm really interested in your research. Like, I kind of like, you can mention like the research topics or like articles you read. I think I might have like mentioned one of them. Obviously, like she specifically turned me down, but then she took my email and sent it off to the new professor. And then from there, I did like an interview with him. But honestly, just be like, tell them who you are, like tell them what your major is, tell them your interests and stuff. Obviously at this time I was like just a MCB major. So it was kind of a stretch for me to be like, take me, I'm not like nutritional sciences, but like I still have all this valuable knowledge and stuff. So just make it proven that like you really want to work with them and that you've taken the time to look at their research. Because if you have no idea what they're researching, they're not going to want you because you haven't taken the time to like understand what they do and what their whole life's work is about.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, so to apply to the health research program, which unfortunately the deadline has passed, you have to submit a cover letter, which is most likely pretty common for a lot of research positions. And I mentioned that I read one of Dr. Oliver's publications in the cover letter. And during my interview, they asked me about it. So thank God I didn't lie and I actually read it because they fully would have seen through me. I think they asked a very specific question too. They were like, what did you find interesting? Because in the cover letter, I said very generally, like, I was interested after reading this article and like whatever I was interested about, I forget now. And they asked specifically like what I was interested about for that specific thing. So thankfully I had an answer because I was prepared. But yeah, definitely show them that you're interested, but then actually follow up on your interest, because if they catch you, that's just more problematic. So if you're actually interested, fully go for it and, actually go 100%.
Yeah, I think those are great answers. And I would just add something really quickly from a career coach perspective that Julie, you pointed out, like, just because you're not in that department that a faculty member is in doesn't mean that you're counted out from that research by any means, as long as you are able to show like interest. And I know one of you mentioned earlier, like willingness to learn and interest in learning. I think that sometimes it goes even further than having like a related major or related experience. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, our next question, I think, Anusha, you're first on this one. How would you say that undergraduate research differs from lab courses that you take as part of your curriculum? Do you use different skills or learn different things?
So I think ultimately they aren't too different, even though if you look at them like microscopically, they're pretty different. Obviously, for me especially, I'm using very different skills. I never interacted with mice in like bio 1107 lab, but I think the bigger picture is that you're using the scientific method. And like I said earlier, where you constantly have to be able to pivot, that's a big part of it, where you come up with a question or you kind of have this idea, even as basic as why does this work? And then you figure out a way that you can that sentence wasn't great. You figure out a way to make it work or figure out how it works. And I think that basic concept does stick from course lab to research lab as well. Obviously, it's a little more specific, where in lab, you're kind of told what the question is, and then by the end of the class, you have the answer. Whereas with research, it might take you years to come up with the answer, if you even can. But I'd say that concept definitely holds true throughout. And also in terms of the lab courses and the actual skills that you learn, those definitely do play a role as well. I think for me, like I said, because I had no research experience, that was kind of a concern for me if anyone would want to take me if I had no research experience. But I definitely promoted myself, showing that I have learned all these skills. I have the ability to learn more, and kind of saying it in that way. So you might not necessarily have the exact skills from whatever course it is that you need in your lab, but the fact that you were able to learn them and pick them up so quickly and do well in whatever course it might be shows that you'd be able to do the same in your research lab.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think for me specifically, since I do wet lab research, which I did see the question below, talked about like what is wet lab research or something, basically means like you work with wet stuff, like you can work with like reagents and like liquids and stuff, and like it's more experimental instead of like working with human subjects. Like we don't work with human subjects at all in this lab. And basically you work like on a bench, which is like a lab bench instead of like working again with patients and stuff. So I feel like since I took like biochemistry and microbiology, those are very badge or bench lab courses. And I learned like techniques like Western blots and just like working with bacteria and stuff, which I do a lot in my lab. So I would say the specific skills are very similar. And my professor was very like excited that I actually knew how to do like so many different things that I learned in lab. So I definitely think the like specific technical skills you learn in lab are very important. But I think it differs from research, because in research you kind of expand on those and actually like learn why you're doing these things. And like, because I feel like in a lab course you kind of are just like told to, grow this bacteria or like, do whatever. You're not really told why you do this and like what's the purpose of it. So in research you definitely understand like, that's like what you use a Western blot for and stuff like that. Yeah.
Awesome. So thanks, Julie, for answering that question about a wet lab as well in your response. So the next question, I'm going to go back to you, Julie, on this one. In Alison's last video, she mentioned that like one of the biggest things she has taken away from her research experience is being able to communicate at different depths. And kind of explain what she's working on to so many different people as a really valuable skill that she's learned. So what do each of you believe is like the most important thing that you've gotten out of your research experiences thus far?
Honestly, I would have to agree with Allie because I feel like I've never been so close with a professor or someone of like this much authority, I guess, because my parents like both have associates, like they didn't have like a big college experience with like research and stuff. So I'm definitely like the first person in my family to go through research and stuff. So I think learning from this type of authority has been really interesting because obviously professors, they seem very like intimidating and stuff. And they definitely are at first, but once you learn how to like talk to them and understand that they're just normal human beings, I definitely think like that's an invaluable skill that I've learned. And honestly, working with graduate students can definitely be pretty difficult because they're obviously also working on their research and trying to gain knowledge as well as you are. And sometimes they do think that they're better than you, which you just have to like prove to yourself and prove to them that like they're not better than you and you can do just as much as they can and stuff. So honestly, just learning how to like, I don't want to say like deal with people, but learn how to like deal with people, I guess. I don't know how else to say it, but yeah.
I'd say for me, it's a little cheesy, but I feel like I've definitely gained more confidence in just my ability to do new things because I feel like I'm a broken record at this point, but the fact that I hadn't had any research experience truly did stress me out, where I felt like I wouldn't be on the same level or I wouldn't have the same knowledge or whatever it was. But then I think the fact that I kind of pushed myself out of my comfort zone and I was able to do it successfully showed me that I can do new challenging things. And then I think on top of that, or maybe not on top, just aside from that, being able to be open when you can't understand something is also something that's a skill that I think as STEM majors is pretty difficult sometimes. It's pretty easy to be like, yeah, I understand totally what you're talking about that HFZ5 gene or whatever anyone's talking about. But I think sometimes, or you need to have a little bit of confidence to show that you don't know what they're talking about. And that's something that I've had to put my pride aside a lot of times to be like, I don't know what they're saying and I need them to explain it to me like 3 more times and then I'll get it. And I would. And I think that understanding between you and your PI is also really important because, for example, 2 weeks ago, I was talking to my PI about writing a thesis and we were talking about it and all. And then I was like, I have no clue how to write a thesis. Like, I've never done this before. Like, how do you do this? And as soon as I said it, part of me was like, oh, that's really dumb. Like, that's a dumb thing to say to this person who just has all this knowledge. But then he was so nice about it. He like walked me through the entire process. And afterwards, I was just like thinking to myself, and I was like, wow, I'm so glad that I actually asked him, because otherwise I would have been scared and probably messed up a bunch of stuff, which would have been fine. I would have learned, but I put my pride aside and I asked him, and now I know exactly what to do. So it's small things like that where it's easy to act like you know a little bit more than you do, but asking questions, like Allie said a few questions ago, and just being open when you aren't understanding something is so key. And I think that translates to more than just research. It's anything. It's any new job. When you aren't sure what you're doing, it's better just to ask than to act like you know what you're doing and then make things worse for the future.
Great. This is all such good information. And I think we are coming up on our last question. So Anusha, you'll take this one first. Can you both share some of the other things that you're involved in on campus and how you think research has been beneficial in comparison to some of your other involvements?
So one of the major things that I'm involved in aside from research is a medical club called Clinical Minds. We actually founded it last fall, or the fall of 2020. I keep saying that's last fall. And this basically during the club, we walk through clinical case studies. So it's kind of showing students the importance of the diagnostic role of doctors, and it's supposed to encourage students to pursue their dreams of becoming medical professionals. And it's not like the logistics of how to take the MCAT, how to apply. It's like it's just supposed to be inspiration and try to motivate students to pursue their dreams. And aside from that, I work with the Center for Career Development as a CLIS career ambassador, where my role is essentially to help all CLIS students to achieve their career goals, regardless of the field. So with all these different facets of my life, and then obviously academics, I think I've realized that one of my passions is helping people find their goals, or helping people advance in their careers in some way, or take the next steps of their life, essentially. And research is kind of, it might sound like a stretch, but honestly, I feel like it's essentially the same thing, where you're trying to do the heavy lifting so that people can get to the next stage of their life. So for example, with what we're trying to do with tinnitus, we're trying to find, or to make, a diagnostic test that will be able to diagnose people with tinnitus, because currently there's no way to diagnose people with tinnitus. And it's a really isolating position to be in, because you have this constant ringing in your ears, which is really frustrating. And there's nothing you can do about it. And there's no qualification of, yes, you actually have it. Like, I am telling you, you have it. So it's similar to my other positions, where it's like, we're trying to take these steps to make a person's life better, or to make their, not life easier necessarily, but just to like help a person in their life, I guess, is a very broad way to put it. Yeah, that might sound like a bit of a stretch, but I do think it's connected and related. And I think that's a big thing that I've realized in my college career, is that a lot of stuff that I do is interrelated, whether I realized it or not when I started to do those things. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, so some of the things I'm involved in is that I work at the Student Health and Wellness on campus, and I've been also a part of HuskyCon, and I feel like those two things have really been as beneficial as research for me. And I think research and those two other things are beneficial in the same way, because they've all taught me what I want to do and what I don't want to do with my life. And I know I keep going back to that, but obviously undergrad is kind of when you really form yourself and figure out what you want to spend the rest of your life doing. And I've realized I want to work in pediatrics, but research has also taught me I really want to work with nutrition. So a way to combine those, but also, have a medical side to it that I've learned from working at Shaw and doing vitals on people and interacting with patients and like people my age. So it's definitely, I feel like they've all been beneficial to teach me what I want to do. And honestly, coming into UConn, I was like, I'm just going to be a doctor. That's what I'm going to do. And I was like, that's the end all be all. But
Oh no, I think we may have lost Julie.
It's well, I'm sure she'll reconnect. I think it's our internet potentially. So yeah.
All right. In the meantime, do you want to show the conclusion slide?
Yes, I can definitely do that. All right, so these are just some upcoming events and deadlines that we thought would be good for you guys to know. So some of these are programs that you can apply to. Like I said, unfortunately, the health research program and the SURF fellowship, I believe, those applications have both ended. But there are a lot of events that, if you're looking for more research opportunities, are great options to go to. On February 3rd, so just in a couple days, there is the Finding Summer Research Opportunities. On the 9th and the 17th of this month, there's webinars for how to get started in undergraduate research. So that's more niche towards the actual starting aspect as opposed to the entire journey. On February 10th, there is a similar panel to today where it's Beyond the Bench, Diverse Pre-Health Research Experiences. So that's going to be very similar to what we were talking about, but specifically with pre-health research experiences. And on the 18th, the apprenticeship program for the SHARE virtual summer research apprenticeship is due. So check that out if you're interested. And the application for the McNair apprenticeship is also due on February 16th. And finally, Spring Frontiers is going to be later this semester. Typically, it's in April sometime. The specific date I don't think is set yet, but that will definitely be there.
It's the 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, I want to say.
Of April.
Yes, they sent the email, I think, yesterday.
Oh.
And I think it was those dates. No worries, but just throwing out there.
Perfect timing. But yeah, that's also a really great place to see students' research. So specific undergrads, you can come and see what they've done, and it's a great opportunity for both viewing research and also presenting your own research if you're interested in that as well. Finally, I just added the link for the UGrad research at UConn. That's really a great place to check out all the resources that they have. They have tons of events, resources, just anything you can think of, people to reach out to. So yeah, that's a great resource to check out if you do want to pursue research in your undergrad.
Great, thank you for going through those dates and deadlines, Anusha. Julie, you did cut off in the middle of your last answer. Do you want to just wrap that up before we close out?
I don't remember where it cut off because it cut off for me right when I finished, but basically anything you do on campus is important, and getting involved in research is important, and just getting involved anywhere is important. And I think they all will be very beneficial in the end. And once you're our age and you're a senior and you're trying to figure out what to do after school, all these experiences you'll see have formed who you are as a person.
Well said. All right, Anusha, do you want to close us out?
Sure. So thank you everyone for joining or watching this video. We really appreciate it, and we hope you gained something and decide to pursue undergraduate research.